Welcome to Weird PVD, the podcast. Every week, your host, Sherry Kasperzak, takes you to the odd corners of beautiful Providence, Rhode Island. From big blue bugs to unique art, from weird history to weird food, you'll never look at Rhode Island's creative capital the same again. Tune in every Weird Wednesday.
What is up, PVD weirdos? I'm recording this on the day before Christmas Eve, so Christmas Eve, if you will. And I've been thinking a lot about Christmas ghost stories, the tradition of telling ghost stories at Christmas time. And in that spirit, I have a couple of stories I wanted to share with you for this episode of Weird PVD, the podcast, that'll put you in the spirit and maybe creep you out just a little bit. The tradition of sharing ghost stories around the solstice goes all the way back to the pagans. The Victorians were also really big fans of story time, particularly creepy ghost stories around the holidays. So it's a tradition that I want to continue. I love ghost stories at the holidays. If you think of things like, A Christmas Carol from Dickens, those were so creepy, but they still really told a story about the meaning of the holidays. And I just think it's a great time to gather around with people that I love and creep them out, because that's kind of my thing. So in that spirit, happy holidays to all of you, and enjoy a few of these scary stories for the Christmas season. And now we've got a couple of more stories from Citrus Mystic from the r/ghosts subreddit. I worked in a Dunkin' Donuts where I experienced two weird things I couldn't explain. Because of the setting, I don't think it could get any more Rhode Island than a Dunkin'. Anyway, this is out in Scituate, which the locals will tell you is full of plenty of ghost stories. It's an old town. This is the Dunkin' on the corner of 101 and Route 6. Supposedly, crossroads can attract energies, or so my mother has said. We have an archetypal woman in white ghost who is seen walking along the side of the highway. Hell, a few of the locals think there's a Bigfoot in the reservoir land. The house The Conjuring was inspired by is one town over, but I digress. I used to work the night shift, and I tended to work with one of two other women. Both of them were a bit more attuned with psychic energies than the average Jane. Also, I should note that both of these occurrences happened after we had locked the dining room and were only serving via the drive-thru. So it's just myself and one other person in the building. Story 1. I was working with a single mom who I'll call Alice. Alice is tiny and feisty and an amazing mom. She actually lived within view of the Dunkin' at the time, which was the main reason she took up the night shift there, for some extra income. If her kids ever needed her, she was right there. Alice was also Wiccan and one of the more psychic ladies I mentioned, and she had actually seen the local woman in white. It was an hour or so until we were closed. Alice and I had locked the dining room for the night and were doing our nightly closing work. I was cleaning out the donut display and she was doing something in the back room. Sometimes the intercom for the drive-thru that our headsets are connected to would lock on open. Basically, the intercom would stay on as if a car had rolled up. Usually when the next car came through and the weight sensor was activated, it would correct itself when they pulled up to pay. But since it was late at night by this point, the customers were few and far between. The intercom had been locked on open for a while. It was a warm spring night, and the background noise of peep toads and crickets in the woods was a welcome distraction from the Dunkin' radio station we had to listen to and couldn't turn off. But at one point, faintly, I began to hear voices through the intercom. I assume a car had rolled up and customers were talking amongst themselves in their vehicle, so I go to check the camera we have that's directly connected to the intercom. No car. I'm kind of puzzled, but haven't mentioned anything to Alice. Before I can, she comes out from the back and says, "Are you hearing this?" in a very definitive way. She already knew there wasn't a car without even checking. I wonder aloud if some kids were parked in the lot, so I opened the back door, but the whole parking lot is empty. We listened to the voices for a while. It sounded like a couple women speaking to each other, but we couldn't make out anything specific. It was very faint, and we could still hear the crickets and peep toads too. I know that sometimes those intercom systems can pick up baby monitors or any radio station. However, although we were within sight of a few houses, we weren't super close to any of them, and the voices did not sound like any radio station chit chat, not even quiet NPR discussions. It just didn't have that cadence. The voices eventually faded out, but we both thought it was peculiar. We had tried to listen closely and make out what they were saying, but weren't successful. Probably lasted 10 to 15 minutes. The intercom malfunctioned and locked on open like that with some regularity, but that was the only time we heard anything besides customers and background noise. I worked there for about a year and a half. Story 2. This one is much shorter. On this night, I was working with my other psychic-ish lady coworker who I'll call Victoria. Again, it was late in the night and we had locked the dining room and were going about our closing procedures. Victoria was in the back room prepping muffins to bake for the next morning, and I was in the front sweeping the dining room. I hear a woman's voice say something that I couldn't make out, and although it doesn't sound like Victoria, I look up expecting that she had asked me something. Only she's not there. I think it's weird and say, "Victoria?" A minute passes and she emerges in the doorway to the back room with a puzzled expression and says to me, "Did you just hear that?" And I simply say, "Yeah," with my eyebrows raised in surprise, hers furrowed, still puzzled. She puts up her hands and matter-of-factly says, "We're going to pretend that didn't happen." TLDR, worked at a Dunkin' Donuts late at night out in the boonies where myself and other coworkers heard disembodied women's voices both on our intercom and in the building on separate occasions. Reddit user Citrus Mystic says, "I lived in a haunted house on Lafayette Street, 1 block into Pawtucket from the east side. I had 5 roommates at the time. We were on the top 2 floors. The landlord at the time and her partner occupied the first floor. For some reason, the way everyone's schedules worked out, I would regularly find myself being the only one in the house between both units. When I was alone, I would often hear someone walking around the house on the other floors. I would usually hear this during the day, but there was one night that, yet again, I find myself alone in the house. My room is on the top floor. I started hearing the disembodied footsteps in the house. Normally, when this happens, I can't really make out where they're coming from, but this time they sounded closer, like they're coming from my unit, but I'm definitely alone in the house. I try to just dismiss it as the house settling and pretend I'm not hearing what I'm hearing. For some context, there was a really loud, creaky step toward the top of the staircase that would make a snapping/cracking sound when someone stepped on it. The footsteps are wandering, and then it sounds like they're slowly starting to come up the stairs to the top floor. After ignoring the apparently approaching footsteps for a few moments, I hear that loud crack from that step at the top of the stairs, and I officially get spooked. I try to feel better and think rationally. I make a big show of dismissing what I had heard. I turn to my big fat orange tabby cat and I proclaim, "Cat, I'm just being a silly goose. There's nothing out there. Look." And I swung open my bedroom door to reveal an empty hallway. But then I turned back to my cat, who was looking down the hallway, and you not, he puffed up all of his fur, then turned away from my door in preparation to flee, looked once over his shoulder back down the hallway, and then ran to my bed and faced the door, all puffy and jumpy. He had never done something like that randomly before, not at all. That was enough for me. I lost it. I started yelling, "Go away, leave me alone, don't come anywhere near me, stay away from my room. You are not welcome on this floor. F off. Go away." I slammed the door closed. Then I proceeded to put on my headphones and blast music while distracting myself by keeping my attention on some nonsense on my laptop, likely Reddit. Eventually, I needed to use the bathroom, which was down the hallway past the stairs. I worked up my nerve and do my best to pretend that never happened. When I reached the bathroom, I looked out the window that overlooked our driveway and noticed one of my roommate's cars was gone. She had gone with another roommate to run an errand and left her car here. I thought, oh my God, did Dee do something like come inside the apartment to get her keys when she came back for her car? And I just screamed at her to get the F out. I immediately texted her and asked if she came inside when she returned from her errand to get her car. She said no one went inside. Our other roommate dropped her off and she went straight to her car. I had other minor things happen at that apartment, but that was the main thing that kind of freaked me out. I also had an ex who lived in one of the renovated mill buildings turned into condos, the one on Dexter Street. That building, or at least his apartment, was haunted, but whatever was there wasn't a spooky jerk. They would just make a racket in the kitchen at night occasionally and move things around. Never got a bad vibe. Here's a retelling of one person's absolutely terrifying encounter with someone who closely matches the Phantom's description. This comes from r/scary stories on Reddit from user FMO_JP. It's titled, "We Picked Up a Hitchhiker." These events start with me and two of my friends, Bernard and Hector, coming back from a long weekend at the Cape Cod for any non-New Englanders here. Me and my buddies grew up with each other in Worcester, Massachusetts, and once college came around, we all kind of split up. Hector moved to Providence, Rhode Island, and Bernard was just always busy with school, while I was busy working in the trades. We decided to find a time where all of us weren't busy and ended up renting a house out in Yarmouth for the Memorial Day weekend, just to chill and hit the beach. After a great weekend of getting drunk and partying like we used to, it was time to head home. We took my car there, which was perfect for the beach, my Volvo C70 convertible. After packing all our bags in the car, we started driving back around 9 or 9:30 p.m. On Monday, back to Providence to drop off Hector. To beat the traffic, I hopped off I-495 onto Route 44, going through the Taunton area, and was just going to follow that all the way to Providence. It was getting late. It must have been around 10:30-ish at this point, and was pitch black outside. No moon or stars in sight tonight. As we were driving, just passing Taunton about 3 or 4 miles passing the city limits, we see him. A dirty-looking, fiery, long, red-haired, and red-bearded looking hobo wearing a red flannel, filthy blue jeans, and a giant backpack on his back, holding his thumb out. As we pass him, I look over to my buddies and say, nobody else is going to be on this road for miles, and he's out in the middle of nowhere. We might as well help him out, I say. That. He looks sketchy, dude, said Bernard. Yeah, I'm not trying to sit back here with him. Let's just go home. I'm tired as said Hector. All right, whatever. I'm stopping for gas at the next gas station, though. I'm almost on E. We drive for about another 2 miles until we see the next gas station, and I fill up my tank and go inside and grab some snacks with my friends. Getting back in the car, I put my key in the ignition, and just our luck, my battery is dead. I knew I should have changed the battery before this trip. I was just being lazy and not even considering it being a problem. As we all stand outside my car trying to figure out what to do and who to call to get a jump, we see the hitchhiker walking up to us. There's no way this guy caught up with this fast. It's impossible. Even if he full sprinted for the 2 miles when we first passed him, there's no fucking way this guy could have caught up with us. You boys need a jump? This is the first thing he said to us in a gravelly smoker's voice. How would he know we needed to jump in the first place? We were just three kids standing outside the gas pump, and there's no way he would know that if there was a problem, that it was a dead battery. Bernard spoke up. The battery's dead. Don't suppose you can help us? Actually, I can, said the hitchhiker as he reached in his giant backpack and pulled out a jump pack. Thanks, man. You're a lifesaver, I said. I popped the hood and he hooked up the cables and turned the jump pack on, and I started my car right up. Thanks, man. I really appreciate it. We gotta head home now, said Hector with the kind of thanks, dude, now get the fuck out of here tone. Hey, can you boys do me a favor? I just need a ride to Rehoboth. You can just drop me off once we get a little past the town line, and I'll walk the rest of the way. I see that you're driving that way anyway, and I really need the help. Right now, boys, he said. I looked to my friends knowing that we pretty much don't have a choice. I mean, as weird as this guy seems, he did just help us, and he doesn't seem dangerous. Sure, he smells like week old piss, but a 10-minute ride into a town we were already passing through seems like the least we can do for helping us out. Yeah, sure, man, hop in, I say. Oh, thank you, man, I really needed this, the hitchhiker said, with a large toothy grin revealing his dark yellow teeth and puffy bright red gums. He hopped in the back seat with Hector, who was looking very visibly uncomfortable. Bernard rode shotgun, and I hopped back into the driver's seat and took off from the gas station, back into the pitch black night. Pulling off from the gas station, we start driving with the hitchhiker just staring out the window and not saying a word. It was deathly silent in the car because for some reason my radio wasn't picking up any channels, which was weird because it's not like we were out in the boonies. Sure, it was quiet and not a lot of houses around, but not even a local station. Also, my broke aux cord, so we couldn't even plug in a phone to listen to music that way. After about 5 minutes of silent driving, Hector tries to make conversation with the hitchhiker. So, man, where are you from? No response from the hitchhiker. You from around here? Still no response. You can hear me, man? The hitchhiker breaks out in an ear-piercing laughter. It took us all by shock, and I lost control of the wheel momentarily from the sudden outburst. The laugh was so loud and encompassing, you could barely hear anyone or anything else. Bernard was holding his hands over his ears, screaming, "What the f?" which was barely audible over the laughter. I was cringing and covering my right ear with my hand as my left was holding on to the steering wheel, and Hector was screaming something that wasn't audible to me at the hitchhiker and reached around and grabbed him when he put a hand on his shoulder. The hitchhiker grabbed Hector's hand, turned his head to look at Hector with wide eyes, pulled a knife from his pocket, and stabbed Hector 3 times in the chest. Me and Bernard are staring in awe at what we just saw from the front seat. And as I try to pull over and slamming on the brakes, the hitchhiker lunges at me and grabs the wheel, still screeching his crazy laugh. He yanks the wheel to the right, going directly towards the woods, even though I was slamming the brakes and tugging it back at the wheel. It still wasn't good enough to avoid the tree. I slammed my head on the steering wheel in the crash and was knocked unconscious for a few seconds. When I look around, the front end of the car was smashed in and smoking. The airbags were deployed. Bernard was bleeding from his head just like I was, and Hector was on the floor in the back, clutching his chest, struggling to breathe, blood coming from his mouth. All this with no sign of the hitchhiker. I shake Bernard, trying to get him out of his daze, and as I'm shaking him, I look through the passenger window next to him, and for a split second, I saw the hitchhiker's face in the window, smiling from the outside. I jumped back in fear and quickly wiped the sweat and blood from my forehead out of my eyes. And once I did, the hitchhiker was gone from the window. I frantically looked around, seeing where he could have gone, and jump out the car window with a sudden burst of adrenaline. I run all around the car and in the immediate area, and the hitchhiker is nowhere in sight. Bernard is now coming out of his daze and opens his door and falls out. Running to his side, I help him to his feet. Hector, I screamed in the back seat. Hector, are you okay? Help me, he said, gurgling up more blood onto his chin. Help me grab him. Bernard screamed, still obviously out of it. Me and Bernard pull Hector from out of the wreckage and lay him up against the tree. Bernard calls the cops, screaming to get an ambulance to us and that some homeless guy stabbed our friend and crashed our car. The police and ambulance showed up after 5 minutes. I guess we were lucky that we were so close to Rehoboth, or else Hector might not have made it. As 2 EMTs rushed Hector onto the stretcher, into the ambulance, 2 other EMTs showed up in another ambulance and tended to mine and Bernard's injuries. The police started asking me and Bernard questions about what happened and how our friend got stabbed. We explained the whole situation and that a red-headed homeless guy stabbed Hector and crashed my car. The cops got wide-eyed and looked at each other awkwardly. They put away their notepads and told us they would look into it. What? What do you mean you'll look into it? The guy is still out there in the woods or around here somewhere. He didn't just disappear, Bernard said. We have other units looking right now, son, trust me. Now go with the EMTs. They want to take a closer look at both of you, said one of the younger cops. What do you mean? You didn't even call anything in, I chimed in. Go now, kid. We'll take care of it, the younger cop's partner said. Me and Bernard were quickly shuffled into the ambulance and brought to the hospital. Me and Bernard both knew that something was up. The cops knew something we didn't, and were doing nothing to try to find this guy. For whatever reason, I'm still not sure. It's a year later now, and all of us are still shaken up about this. Hector healed up fine, Bernard moved across the country to the West Coast, and I'm still living in Worcester. The police never followed up with us or tried to ask us more questions about the stabbing or the hitchhiker. I'm surprised they never even tried to pin it on me or Bernard. They just never got back to us. But that's neither here nor there. So I hope you enjoyed all of these Christmas style ghost stories, even though they weren't based on at Christmas time. But I wanted to remind you to go give me a follow. You can follow me at Instagram. I am at weird_PVD. You can also follow me over on YouTube. You can subscribe. I post not only the Weird PVD podcast every week, it's every Weird Wednesday. I also post weird, morbid, kind of creepy historical facts from around the world on my YouTube channel. You'll find those over on my shorts. You can also follow me on TikTok. I am at weird.pvd on TikTok, where you can also find some of my creepy historical facts over there. And anywhere else, if you can find my podcast over at Apple Podcasts and Spotify, would really appreciate a follow. So in that spirit, happy holidays to everyone. And don't forget to keep PVD weird.